All right, so if you don't have a pressure bleeder, you can get a second person. And so I would recommend getting a child. And so that might take you longer than going out and buying the pressure bleeder.
All right, so today I'm going to show you how to bleed your brakes yourself so you don't have to pay someone else to do it. So normally bleeding your brakes is a two-person job, and I'll get my son later and have him come down and I will show you how to do it the old-fashioned way like that. But the easier way to do it and make it a one-person job is using one of these motive power bleeders or a similar product. I'll put the link to this in the video description, but this makes it super simple to do it all by yourself. Flushing or changing the brake fluid every couple of years is really important, especially on a car that you're taking to the track, because moisture gets into the brake fluid and will cause it to be not as effective, and you can actually boil the brake fluid when you're at the track because it gets extremely hot under those circumstances when you're doing very, very heavy braking. All right, the first thing you're going to want to do is get access to the brake fluid reservoir, the master cylinder, and on the Lotus that is underneath this panel. So you'll need a little Allen key here, and you will just want to gently remove this one Allen head bolt, and be careful not to scratch up your paintwork. Make sure you don't lose the extra little piece. There's also a rubber washer under this. As you remove it, make sure you grab that so that you don't lose it. And then this just kind of pulls out. It comes up from here, and there are two pins in here, so you want to kind of pull it towards you. I find that wiggling it a little bit helps. And then this piece will just come right off. This is the rubber washer that you want to make sure you don't lose right there. This is your brake fluid reservoir right here. Your brake fluid should never actually go down unless you have a leak, because it is a closed system. So you shouldn't ever have to add brake fluid, but this is where it is if you ever need to, and this is where we will be keeping it full for the brake bleeding procedure. The other thing that's important to do is you need to bleed the brakes, the calipers at each of the wheels, in order from the one that has the furthest, the longest brake line from here to the shortest. So you want to start with the one that is the furthest away. So being that this is on the driver's side, the longest brake line would be the brake line that runs from here to the passenger side rear wheel all the way in the back. So we're going to start with that. The next longest line would be the other rear wheel on the driver's side, and then the passenger side, and then the shortest brake line would be the one that just goes right here to the driver's side front wheel. So you want to do them in that order. It depends on where your brake fluid, where your master cylinder and brake fluid reservoir are located. In a car where it's located on the passenger side, it would probably be opposite. But think about where the longest lines would be, and that will tell you what order to do them in. Now, brake fluid can damage your paint, so I would highly recommend using an old towel or something just to cover up anywhere that you might potentially spill brake fluid during this process. This thing is like a little filter. You'll want to take that out. It'll help, at least for this first part. So you'll want to make sure you have something to put old brake fluid in, like a glass jar. And one tip, if you're doing a full brake fluid flush here, you're going to flush through all the fluid. So one tip is you can actually siphon out some of the existing fluid from here to save yourself time and not have to run that all through the lines. So you can get it down decently low. You don't want to get it so low that you suck any air in or anything, but take some of it out just to save you some time. And again, we don't want to get it so low that we introduce air into the system, because air in your brake system is really bad, and getting those air bubbles out means you need to rebleed it again because you want it just to be fluid coming out. And the fluid that I like to use is this Motul RBF 600. It's really good. It's good for track days. I'll put a link in the description for this. You should always use it from a new canister also. Never use brake fluid that's been sitting on your shelf for a really long time. All right, so what I'm gonna do is fill this back up a bit, and then I'm gonna hook up the pressure bleeder, and we'll go from there. So you want to make sure this is clean before you put the brake fluid in, and I put 2 containers of fluid in here. And then you want to run a little bit through the line just to clean that out since the last time that you used it. So I'm just going to pump a little bit out through here. All right, that should be good. And then what you can do is actually crack this thing open to relieve a little bit of the pressure there. So one thing that you do need to do is make sure that you have the right size fitting for your master cylinder. These all have different threads and different sizes, so make sure you get the right size for that's gonna fit on your master cylinder. After that, the next thing to do is relatively simple. I'm just gonna connect this on here. And actually on the Lotus, it rubs a tiny bit on the clamshell. So you wanna kind of hold it apart, hold it forward while you're screwing it on. All right, so you wanna screw that on, make sure it's on there nice and flush, just like the cap would be. And you also wanna make sure that the connector on the motive power bleeder is all solid too. The next thing to do is you wanna pump this up and build up about 10 to 15 PSI of pressure. That should be plenty. All right, we've got about 12 PSI in there. Should be good. And this will actually keep your brake fluid topped up as long as this doesn't go dry. And it will keep pressure on the whole system here. The next thing that you'll need is something to catch the old brake fluid in. And so you can buy these bleeder bottles, or if you just have an old water bottle, I find these hint bottles work really well because they've got very thick cap. Drill a hole in it, actually drill a small vent hole as well. Put a little piece of tubing through it. I actually put a zip tie on my tube in there so I don't accidentally pull it out. And this will work great. Make sure you have the right diameter tube that will fit over the bleeder nipple there. It's usually about 1/4 inch or so, but you might have to experiment depending on your car. You'll need to remove this little bleeder cover here, this little rubber cover that's on the end. So on the Lotus, it's kind of weird that it uses a 7/16 wrench on these bleeder screws. So what you want to do is put that on there ahead of time first, and then attach this hose to the end of the bleeder screw there, just like that. And then all you have to do is crack open that bleeder screw. This one is pretty tight, but they shouldn't be that tight. Just give that a little crack, and you will see the fluid will start to get pushed through. And you can see there's some junk in my fluid here as it's coming out. So if it doesn't immediately come, just crack it open a little bit more, and it should start to flow out really nicely. And now this is the longest brake line, so we want to definitely bleed off the most fluid from here. And actually it's a good idea, if you can, to get different colored fluids so that as the old fluid comes out, you can tell the new fluid is coming in fresh, because it would actually change color. I didn't do that, so we're gonna have to just kind of a little bit guesstimate when we've got all the fluid out here. Okay, so there we bled through about this much fluid, which should be sufficient to have cleared out the entire line from the reservoir back, plus the little bit of fluid that was in there. So once you have that, you want to tighten up the bleeder screw and carefully remove the hose. Try not to make a mess with this. Good to have a rag nearby. Just for good measure, if you spilled any, you might want to use this brake clean stuff to just kind of spray it off, because this really dilutes and takes care of any brake fluid and it won't corrode anything. And then you'll just want to replace the little protective rubber cap. Maybe dry that off a little bit more, although the brake clean will evaporate very, very quickly. And then you're just going to move on to the next wheel and do the same thing again. Be sure to always be checking the fluid, how much fluid you have left in the pressure bleeder. You do not want that to run dry. All right, now we're doing the front right brake. It's exactly the same as all the others. Here you can see some little air bubbles coming out, so we want to make sure that we get all this air out of the system. Make sure that it's coming out as a steady stream. All right, so one unique thing is on the front wheels of the Lotus, you actually can do the bleeding without removing the wheel. You can obviously see the bleed screw is right here. And so it's extremely accessible, even right through the wheels. The only reason I like to remove the wheel is because I don't want to spill brake fluid on the wheel and mess up the finish or mess up the paint on the wheel. So I recommend removing the wheel, but in a pinch, if you're at the track or on the side of the road somewhere, you can easily bleed the brakes just right here. All right, now when you get done, do not make the mistake of removing it from the master cylinder first. What you're gonna wanna do is release the pressure here first, not up at the master cylinder. So just crack this loose. And then you can remove it from the master cylinder.
So if you don't have a pressure bleeder to do this as a one-person job, you're gonna need a friend or a kid or a neighbor or something like that. To be honest, it's easier to go out and buy a pressure bleeder than to grow a child. So I would recommend the pressure bleeder, but if you've got a child like I do, then they can help you do this the old-fashioned way. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let's say you found an assistant now, and you're basically gonna do it in a very similar way to what you did before, where you're gonna put the bleeder bottle on, and then you're going to crack open the bleeder screw, and then you're gonna have your assistant press the pedal and release the pedal a bunch of times to pump the fluid through this line. All right, so here we go. We're gonna crack this open. Just open that bleeder screw a little bit. And then I'm gonna ask my assistant, all right, press, release, press, release, press, release. As they do that, you wanna make sure you're checking the brake fluid reservoir because that level is actually going to go down, and you wanna keep that topped up as they do this. So check it every once in a while. But basically, you don't have to close this every time they press and release. You can just open it and have them do a bunch of cycles. And once you see the fluid coming out clear with no air bubbles and clean fluid, then they're good. So you can have them do another press. You press. And then tighten it down while he's pressed. That's the way I like to do it. And then release. And then press it again. And does it feel real firm? All right, and then just rinse and repeat and do that on all four wheels, again in the same order of the longest brake lines to the shortest brake lines. So, and I'm showing you here on the last wheel because I already did the other three using the pressure bleeder. All right, and then all you gotta do is put your cap back on, make sure you're above the full line here on your reservoir, which you should be if you've been keeping it topped up the whole time. And definitely make sure you do not get brake fluid on any painted surfaces. And if you do, clean it up immediately, either with brake clean or with some water, soap and water. So there you go, I showed you two ways to bleed the brakes, either with the pressure bleeder or doing it the old school way. I showed you how to do it on this Lotus, but it's pretty much the same on any car that has disc brakes with a caliper and a rotor that grabs it and has a bleeder screw on it and uses a hydraulic braking system. It's gonna be exactly the same. So now you know.